Hi, Lisa. How are you?
I don't know. Do we? I don't really know how to answer that question anymore, honestly.
Yeah,
It's
we've kind of jumped from the frying pan into the fire, and I'm not talking about things heating up in Texas or Southern California.
no. No, yeah, it's been a strange week for sure. Week and however many days. Um, yeah. But, we're here to shed some light on some things, to have some honest conversation about what's happening in the world and where tennis fits into all that. And I want to just let our audience know that you and I had a conversation yesterday about do we do this show today in light of what's happening around our country and how it feels really petty and unimportant to be talking about playing tennis in the midst of the racial tension, and tension just is even the wrong word. The unrest that we're watching and experiencing firsthand. And yet, tennis is what you and I do. So it we kind of came to the conclusion that we need to use our voices to kind of integrate what's happening in our world with what can happen in tennis and how the two work together and how we can use our sport to facilitate some positive change, right?
Right. Yeah. So, we kind of got to get right at it. The reality is, we're going to talk about sports and all that's going on in terms of the discussion relative to racial equality, racial harmony, violence.
Oop, we lost you there, Dewey, or I lost you there. Are you there?
Yep. Yep.
Okay.
I suspect, yeah, there's a setting. We've been playing with things a little bit. So, can you hear me now?
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, where this discussion is going to not be about the violence that's happening, but certainly having the discussion which was spurred on by the most recent violence, the murder of George Floyd. I keep struggling with a name. I don't know how you can say a name so much and struggle with it over and over and over again, and not because it doesn't matter. But it does kind of speak to the fact that this is it was a murder which has me outraged, but it doesn't have me any more outraged than any of the other ones that we've talked. Breonna Taylor, we Philando Castillo. We can go on and on and on and back and back and back. And I know that you left L.A. the first time because of some of the violence in Rodney King. So how that all happened. So we're just going to kind of be real about sports,
Yeah.
tennis. What solutions might tennis be able to hold? Because I certainly feel like sports has been a catalyst for change. I one of the first things I had to memorize as a new cadet at West Point was MacArthur's opinion of athletics, which is upon the fields of friendly strife are sown the seeds, which upon other fields on other days will bear the fruits of victory. And I found that that saying applies to so many different things that I've run across in life. And I've spent a lot of my life involved in sports, largely because I believe in those other lessons that will be applied later on in life.
Right.
But why don't we start out? And what questions do you have of me? Because here's a chance for someone who isn't of color to, I am of color, but for you to ask questions of someone
Really?
who is, yeah, the replay of this will certainly show me, like the mirror does every day, that that's me. Um,
Yeah.
but what questions can I answer for you? And to preface it, I have probably a different black experience than many people in America. I grew up in a community where we were one of less than a handful of African American families when I was born. So I grew up in a place where I was the only person of color, other than possibly my family members, for a good bit of my life growing up. So I see things maybe a little bit differently, but I'm open to
Yeah.
answer whatever questions you got.
Okay, well, and I think, this is an opportunity to have this conversation, and I want to say before I start asking my questions that I have so much respect for you and the way that you handle conversations with me. Someone who hasn't walked in your shoes. As a Jewish person, I've experienced anti Semitism, absolutely. But being discriminated against on the basis of your religion, which is not evident the second you walk into a room full of people, is very different from being discriminated against based on the color of your skin. So I want to just start out by acknowledging that I understand that difference. At the same time, I think my question to you, my first question to you, has to do with how, in the wake of what's happening in the country right now, and people keep commenting they hate when I say in the wake of, but we are in the midst of something huge right now.
Mhm.
How do we take what's happening and use tennis to breed a mindset, a culture of not being colorblind, because I don't think that's what the black community is asking of the white community, for us to be colorblind, but rather to recognize color and embrace the fact that we may look different on the outside, but may have some real similarities once we dig into the inside.
Yeah.
What's tennis's role?
Well, I guess let me start with my worldview because I believe worldview is a lot. And I've not ever believed, maybe not since I was old enough to have rational thought and think through many things on my own, I've not believed that America was a melting pot. I do not believe that you take all of these things and you put them in and everybody becomes the same. I have looked at America more as a tossed salad where there are radishes and tomatoes and cucumbers and lettuce and onions, and they all have a distinct flavor, but they all add to the overall experience of having a salad that's not more than just a bowl of lettuce. Um, so I don't think that we should be looking at race as everybody's the same because everybody isn't the same. Everybody's experiences aren't the same. The culture that people bring, the foods, the traditions, and understanding them bring color, bring flavor, bring the essence that life can be. And I think we too often make the mistake. And I guess I have to say that I've been put taken aback many times in my life because I grew up where I did, and I was involved in grew up in a community where the racial tensions revolving around the busing issue in the 1970s were huge. Kids were bused out from the city of Boston to where I lived, and there were times when some of the local kids climbed on what was called Metco, is the program that bussed the kids out, and the local kids would climb on the Metco buses and start riots that made the Boston news, and I would talk to them about, well, why aren't I experiencing any of this? And many times they would say the most stupid thing to me, which is, well, you're not really black. And it's like, well, how am I not really black? But the reality is, they saw me as a person because they went to kindergarten with me, they went to nursery school with me, they played little league and you know ice hockey and all of those other things with me. So I was someone who was part of their community. Seeing me didn't seem out of place to them. Seeing a group of people who were brought in from somewhere else seemed very out of place. But
How
most
did
of
it
my
feel to you? How did it feel to you when those kids came in from Boston? Did it feel out of place to you?
Well, maybe not for me because my mother had been a guidance counselor in the school system and she became the first METCO coordinator for Concord. So she was responsible for the entire program that was busing the kids from Boston to Concord, Massachusetts. And so we were a host family. So Mark Jones was my host brother, and he was someone who, if he was playing sports, would stay at my house because those kids were being bused where they were getting on the bus at, 10 past 5 in the morning. And if they were playing
Yeah.
sports and took a late bus home, they weren't getting home till 8 or 9 at night. So they would have host families that they would stay with. And so, I had the opportunity, a cultural experience where I would also get to go and stay at Mark's house and get experience. They lived in a three-family house in Boston, and we would run through the three-family houses, three triple deckers, and have water balloon fights and do all kind. It was fun. It was one of the most fun experiences that I can remember as a kid because it was just so different, and everybody just enjoyed life. Um, but it didn't seem
So
strange
let's
to
bring
me.
this back to tennis though. Let's bring
Okay.
this back to tennis because again, my question is what can we as a sport? I mean, we saw USTA yesterday released a statement and
And
I
everybody's
was
releasing
glad.
statements, and I think it's a bunch of
Right.
crap. Honestly,
Well,
I'm
it's the
I'm at
same
that
thing that
place.
happened with COVID-19.
Right.
So,
So I look
right.
at it as tennis was the first place I experienced racism. I grew up at a small tennis and swim club in Lexington, Massachusetts, called, at the time it was Middlesex Tennis and Swim Club. It's now the Boston Club. The tennis pro there had grown up in Southern California. He played at Harvard, and he had a house somewhat out in the country where he had a tennis court in his yard. Well, the other kids, the white kids in the program, had the opportunity to go spend the weekends at his house and train. And I was as good a prospect as any of them.
Mhm.
Never once was I offered that opportunity to go and do that. So I viewed tennis right away as a racist kind of place. I chose tennis to be the place that I kind of broke through the racism. When I first started coaching, I took a job at a program in inner city Boston that Bud Collins always wrote about every year called Sportsman's Tennis Club, because it was the kind of place where everybody was welcome. If you were in the city of Boston, it was not just an inner city program. As a matter of fact, it was one of those great iconic programs that it almost became hard for the kids that lived in the projects right next door to the program to get into because, people with money find ways to get into the things that have value. So there were a great mix of people, many of whom did well financially, but some who didn't. And tennis was this was their first exposure as a family to tennis. What I found,
Well, and I was
oh,
going to ask you though, I mean, choosing to choose tennis, knowing that, I mean, I'm sure even as a young child, you would watch tennis on TV or read about tennis, and you didn't see a lot of people that look like you.
Arthur Ashe.
So,
That's it.
right.
So yeah, so I gravitated towards people like VJ Armitage or Raul Ramirez from Mexico, anybody who had some kind of flavor to them. Um, because yeah, you're right, there weren't a lot of people like me that I could use as role models. So
But now we have more. It's not even by any stretch, but definitely tennis has become more colorful, more flavorful, as you say. I like that term actually. Um, and so we're seeing kids of color, whether they be black or Hispanic or Indian, being drawn into the sport because it is more accessible.
in spite of
But yet
itself.
right, but we still do hear those stories of kids being discriminated against based on skin color. And I suspect some of that comes from the fact that if you walk around junior tournaments, a lot of the officials are of a generation or two older than even you and I are. And the majority of them look like me, not like you.
If I have a hard time. Tennis has fought itself for a very, very, very long time. And what it does is it brings in experts to try and solve problems, but it solves the problems by creating separate solutions outside of the mainstream rather than figuring out how to make things more inclusive. It becomes, and we could have a long discussion about integration and its value, and that black communities were stronger during segregation than they became afterwards because the people that could
Right.
leave left, and they left behind those that were least able to bring each other up. Um, but the reality is, tennis set up, NJTL programs and these inner city CTAs that are full of people who all look the same. And there wasn't things that were inclusive. When I will tell you the absolute best programs I ever had, but one of them was something that was called the Mind.
Oh, we just lost your audio again, Dewey. Or I lost your audio. Are you there? Producer Kim, I don't know if you're getting his audio, but I am not.
Am I back? Am I? I think I'm back. And now Lisa's gone. Lisa, can you hear me? But we can't hear Lisa. And I think you got to take out the automatically mix audio out of the graphic. Why don't we have you? Lisa, if you can hear me, why don't you go out and come back in? And I bet, hopefully, we're going to fix it. And I'm just going to entertain people for a second. So, um, I don't want Lisa to miss what I was talking about with the minority majority program, because it was a program whereby there was no majority. Um, and let's see.
Can you hear me?
I can. Can you hear me?
I can.
All right. Well, let's just stay here, and we're not going to go to the graphics for a minute because I don't want to lose you again.
Okay.
So, welcome to the world of life. But the
Yeah.
minority majority program, and I was gonna had a picture to show of the kids that were in the program. Was a program where the goal was to have enough diversity that at no point in time was there ever a majority.
Hmm.
So if I were to, look at that picture, I believe it had 8 kids, and there were no more than three. And I'm actually looking at it on a different screen: 2, 4, 6, 8, 9, 10, including me, 11, 10 kids. And there were no more. They're, represented by a couple of Indian kids, my kids that were mixed. A young lady who's,
Again.
majority. And the kids loved it, right? There was nobody felt where they were a minority that anybody looked at them differently, because there was no group that look down on other people. And
Right.
it was the kids' favorite time to be out there. And I found that in other programs, program that I had in Charlotte, North Carolina, was very similar to that, where it felt like the United Nations. If you were to listen to the parents talking on the phones waiting for kids to get picked up, there were more languages, and even within the same, if they were from the same country, they spoke different dialects. And it was inclusive because it was everybody, and it was became about tennis. Tennis hasn't done a very good job of that because they don't want to. The
How
reality is, why wouldn't they be looking at somebody like me who's worked in any number of and started programs and spent a couple $100,000 supporting players and things? Why wouldn't they spend second round US Open prize money? If you just
Right.
made it into the main draw of U.S. Open last year, $58,000. If you won a round and made it to the second round, that's $100,000. Why wouldn't you throw $100,000 at somebody like me who has done most things that there are to do as an actual practitioner? Well, why? Because maybe I'm too real for people, and maybe they don't want to hear the real. I went from golden boy to outcast, so to speak, because of the USTA, and I'm gonna be real about it. In 1992, I was on the USTA New England Sectional Board of Directors. I was chairman of the Community Development Committee, and I was on the district. I was first vice president of the Eastern Mass District. I moved to Atlanta because I wanted to do really great things with tennis, and there was, too many limitations with having to have indoor court time in Massachusetts. So I moved to Atlanta, and I said, "Great, can I get involved?" Because they were looking for people of color, more people, and they were like, "Well, we don't have enough minorities with experience." Well, here I am, been chairman of Community Development Committee, sectional board of directors, and they tell me, "Well, great, why don't you start on the Georgia Minority Participation Committee?" So not even at the sectional level, at the district
Mm-hmm.
level, and on the GRIPE committee. And I said, you can keep your little committee assignment where you have people and give them a place to gripe, but really aren't ever going to make a change. And I'm going to bounce. I'm going to go do the work. And I did the work for who knows how long. I don't know how many people can say that they've worked with juniors of Hispanic and Asian and African American and Caucasian. I guess I've not had a Hispanic player that I've worked with who was top 10 in the country, but certainly African American, Asian American, um, and
Well,
you
I
know
mean, there's
what?
no question, Dewey, that you've done the work, that you've had the experience, but you are one person, and you are only able to be in one place at a time unless you've got some superpower you haven't shared with me yet. And
Hmm.
I guess my question is, how does tennis reconcile the the need to serve the community at large, which includes children and adults of every racial, ethnic, nationality, religion, with the high cost of participating in our sport at a high level, which, listen, we all know how much it costs to develop a junior player to the top of the game. It's, definitely in the six figures, start to finish. How do we reconcile that with also giving coaches the financial support that they need to offer players an opportunity to train and play without having to pay the exorbitant costs, offering scholarships or discounts or whatever, but still allowing the coach to make a living and support his or her family? I mean, there's so many pieces to the puzzle, and I
The
don't
real
think.
the reality is people in the community of dark-skinned folk, almost none of us have gotten involved in tennis because of the money. So for many of the most successful, it was a side hustle. So there was some other job that was paying the bills, and it was being out there every afternoon so that kids in the community had a safe place to be during the hours of 4 to 7 in the afternoon when the devil does his magic. And
Right.
so that was the primary reason. And
But
things
how many coaches of the quality that you bring were doing that?
I would say that I learned from many, and I don't know how many there are, but I would say that they weren't all that. That if we were to look at the Florida qualifier is called the Bobby Curtis. Bobby Curtis did it at Moore Park in Miami for years and years and years. If you were to look at Kim Sands and Rick Davison and many people came out of that program. So the level of excellence that was brought by somebody, and I suspected from what I've heard, it ruined his marriage just like it's ruined many other people's marriages because he was devoted to that park and those kids. When I was in Atlanta, Georgia, my dad, Ernie Peterson, was my dad, and there was not a better coached. There were more kids came out of there than pretty much anywhere of that where everybody was of a high standard. There are places like that everywhere. McGregor Park in Houston, where John Wilkerson, trained Laurie McNeil and Zena Garrison. Those places exist all over the place, and they were networked together where you knew where those other great programs were and were willing to share the information. And the USTA
But
very easily could have tapped into that and can still tap into that if they choose to do so. It's not.
but let me ask you this, Dewey. Is the onus on coaches of color to start these programs and grow these programs? Is the onus on every single coach, regardless of color? Or is it on some outside organization or a combination of efforts? I mean, how how does someone who wants to start a program like this where they're bringing kids from all different backgrounds together so that we foster a sense of caring for one another, that we're all human beings, we're all members of this human race, we all live in the same place, we all have the goal of getting better at tennis. How do we start that movement, or not start it, because obviously it already exists in some communities, but how do we grow that movement and make our sport a beacon for other sports to look at and say, hey, if rich white country club tennis can do this, certainly other groups can make this happen. I'm looking for real concrete suggestions. Let's get people, thinking about how to bring these types of programs into their communities, or if the programs already exist, to shine the light on them and let them be a model.
I think it's a key. The key is to somehow attach the funding vehicle, which can support those that might not be able to fund themselves, to be able to make the sport one where someone goes as far as their talent and desire allows. And I think it's a criminal act to start a program with a bunch of inner city kids who can't pay and get them started as beginners and then have them hit the wall where now all of a sudden they need more and they can't get more, because the lesson that teaches
Right.
is don't go outside, don't look outside past what you see in your backyard. So if you see people playing basketball all around you, stick with basketball. Don't try to go over those tennis courts, because tennis isn't really available to you. And then what's going to happen? That message is going to be coming from the people that want kids to get into bad things, and the kids are going to be like, I guess you're right. So I'm going to
Right.
go do what I see the guy driving the Cadillac or the Rolls or whatever it happens to be at this point in time, what they're doing. And that's generally not real good stuff.
So we know the answer is not coming in and doing a 1 day event or a 2 day event, and then bringing in rackets, bringing in shoes, bringing in balls, bringing in nets, and then at the end of the event packing all that stuff up and hightailing it out, which in the past we have seen that from our governing body. That's not a solution. That's a, dangle a carrot and then yank it away. Okay, that doesn't work. We don't, that's not what we're hoping for here. We want sustainable programming. We want money that doesn't just come in for 1 year or one weekend and then disappear. We want things that are going to be sustainable.
But we create change one person at a time and one program at a time. It's unreasonable to believe that we're going to dictate from above, that under this great big umbrella, we're going to make all of these changes. What we have to do is we've got to go find somebody who's in the park every afternoon, knowing that, the first afternoon I'm not in the park and the kids have to go find something else to do, they're not going to come back. So I'm going to be out there every afternoon, no matter what, and change that park. and change that community and create it. I know that I created a program in a public park in Charlotte, North Carolina. Well, one day I found a little 12-year-old African American boy hiding behind a tree, who wanted to play tennis. And when I asked him to come over, and he's like, "Well, I know it's going to cost a lot of money." And I said, "Well, I need to talk to your dad because I don't kind of negotiate with kids." He's like, "Well, we don't have any money, so you don't need to talk to my dad." Well, it ended up, he didn't start till he was 12 years old. And that summer, he was about as good as the beginner 7-year-olds. And he played some really horrible matches. But by the time he was done with junior tennis, he was on scholarship playing at North Carolina State University. He was a very, very good tennis player. Um,
Hmm.
that was just me being
But
in a
the
park and
funding,
wanting to make a difference. And then some other
right?
people
But
stepped up
still,
along the
some
way and supported. And
okay. And that's what I'm getting at. We all know that it costs money and the money has to come from somewhere. So if it's not coming from the families because they don't have it, and we can't expect coaches to just give away their time 100% of the time because coaches
Mhm.
have to support themselves, then where are the funding sources? We've got, USTA gives out grants, and that's all well and good. And listen, when I started the middle school program in East Cobb County, Georgia, it started with $1,000 USTA grant. But guess what? After the first year, that grant was gone, and then
Yeah.
I was left to figure out how to fund this thing. And I suspect that that's happening with programs all over the place where they kick off with grant money from the governing body, but then once that grant money's gone, they're left to flounder and figure out how to fund themselves. So where does the funding come from? How do we help coaches understand fundraising, and how do we help coaches understand getting sponsors for programs or asking the people in their communities to write that check? I mean, not everybody's good at asking for money. I stink at it. I
Hmm.
hate asking
Yep.
for money. Um, so how do we do that? I mean, to me, that's a tangible skill that we can help develop among coaches that want to start these types of programs and bring kids in who all look different from one another, like that photo that you showed us earlier.
It's a matter of training and inclusion, right? There, we're back to the same thing. I was early. There was a time when I was actually director of player development for the American Tennis Association, which was the oldest African American sports organization, where folks of color had to play before we could play in USLTA events. At that point in
Right.
time, I wanted to know where all the great programs were, and so I went around to different places: Arthur Ashe Tennis Center in Philadelphia, and the program down in D.C., and what was going on. What I saw was there were a wide mix of people. If you were to look at how the organizations were structured, from both the volunteer and staff level, it wasn't just they weren't just black organizations. They were ones where if you went to DC and you went to the facility where the tournaments held, the H.G. Fitzgerald Tennis Center, and if you were to have looked at the offices behind the scenes, there were a lot of 20 something Caucasian white females who had just got their MBAs and were looking to cut their teeth in an environment where they were what we would call young hungries, right? They wanted to make a name for themselves and they wanted to learn in the trenches, and they were going out and finding the money to create tennis programs throughout the DC area all the time as part of what they were doing, also raising sponsorship dollars for what I'm not sure if it's still the Newsweek or what the name of the event is at this point in time.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so somebody said this is important. The sustainability is important. So we're going to not just put the people out on court, and however long the grant lasts, that's how long it's going to be. And we're going to end up with old balls and broken rackets and that need stringing. But we are going to take care of that part of it, which will enable it to be an ongoing, sustainable thing all the time. Because the reality is, if you've written one of these grant applications or filled out one of these grant applications, one of the things it asks in most of them is, what is your plan for
Right.
being able to fund yourself
Sustainability.
after? Right.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, so providing the assistance, providing somebody to step in, and so maybe the funding isn't to necessarily directly to the coach. It is to provide a part-time person who's able to research and write the grants for that area. Um,
Right. Well, we're going past our time as always, but
yeah.
I would like to put out a call to action, Dewey. I would like to challenge those who love tennis and those who are committed to creating change in our sport, and not just from an optics point of view, but real internal change where anybody who wants to pick up a tennis racket and step foot on a court, regardless of skin color, feels comfortable doing that and feels welcome doing that. And so, my call to action is, if you are a coach or a parent or a community activist who feels that this is something important, identify a place in your community where you can set up or continue to support an already existing program that is following the tenets of being welcoming, being all inclusive, creating diversity, creating change from within, and identify people with available funding in your community to help sustain those programs or get them off the ground and then sustain them. And let us know what you're doing. We want to hear from you. So comment, email one of us, tag us on Twitter or Instagram or wherever you are, Facebook, and let us know what you're doing in your community or what you want to do if you're seeking financial support, and let us help you connect to people that can give you that funding. I mean, to me, that's a step in the right direction. And am I just being white here, Dewey, and am I being Pollyannish?
Well,
I mean, seriously.
no, I think it's important to know where there are little sparks which exist, and if the big guns, the ones with the great big billows, can find where the sparks already exist and fan the flames so that it grows, that's much easier than trying to start from scratch. So identifying where those places are, I think, is a huge start. I would further that by saying, if the USTA is truly interested in learning from the experience of people like me, reach out to people like me. Take some of your resources and learn. And I'm not talking about create some charrette where you bring in a bunch of people in and you pay us a couple $100 to sit around in a room and have a focus group. And, you can take a couple $100 and it has no value to me at this point in time. But if you want to actually learn what the solutions which work are. Find the people who have done things which have worked in more than one place, because just because there's magic one place doesn't mean that magic is
Right.
going to go everywhere. But there are those people that have just figured out how to make things work wherever they were, and reach out to them and do what's right. Don't create a
And
bunch of silly statements like the ones coming like I'm glad they come to you. I just delete them. I don't even read them. I read the one that came from you because
well,
it came from you. I mean, the one from USTA Northern that you forwarded
yeah.
to me. So,
But I think one thing that you and I can do to really start the ball rolling or give it a little shove is to be connectors, right?
mhm.
So if the people who are doing these programs now reach out to us so that we know who you are, And then the people who are interested in creating those programs or supporting the existing programs also reach out to us. So we know who you are. We can put you together and hopefully we can help move things along in a manner that feels like it's the right thing to do. I mean, and this is part of my white privilege challenge, right? Things that I look at and say, oh gosh, I think this is the right way for things to happen. It's easy for me from the outside to look in and say that. But the fact that you and I work together, Dewey, gives us, I think, some balance, certainly provides me with a reality check that I need, and hopefully will help people feel like, this is a real effort that these two are looking to make here.
Yeah, and I'm gonna make a joke, and don't make light of what I'm going to say. Instead, you can keep your comments to yourself because this is just kind of a joke.
Uh-oh.
But um, for a long time, I used to paraphrase something that Steve Martin said in The Jerk. In the movie The Jerk, he made a comment that I was born a poor black child.
Yeah.
For a long time, I said, I was born a middle class white child, because that was the experience that I knew. But I chose a long, long time ago to understand the other side of it. So I've long moved past that. But I know that there are a lot of people who just want to make themselves feel good. They're do-gooders. They want to write a check and clear their conscience and believe that they did right. Reality is, I don't want to put those people down because we need those people, right? I
Well,
don't
that's what I
really
was going to
care.
say.
I
We
don't care
need
the
check
motivation.
writers.
Yeah, I don't need to care
Yeah.
about the motivation for you writing the check. Write the check. Write the check. If you don't want to do the work, help fund the people that want to do the work to make the change. Because it is very, very hard for those people who are somewhat successful, but not uber successful, where their business will continue to flourish without them, where they have unlimited time off. I'm going to digress for a second. One of the things that used to be required to become USTA national president was you essentially needed to have unlimited time off, and you needed to have a personal assistant that you could direct to do USTA business. That's kind of what was necessary to climb to the
Wow.
highest echelon of the USTA. Yeah, yeah, I kind of was an insider at one point in time. Um, but we need people to write checks because there are a lot of people who have really good ideas who have been doing it for less than market rate for many, many years, and consequently end up like I am, where I could go on my app and hold up how much money I owe a hospital from having had a heart attack, because I did most of this. I spent well over $100,000 out of my inheritance to help people chase dreams in the sport of tennis. And now I don't have it in the bank to do things that I might want to do now. Well, that was a choice I made. Was it a right choice? No, it was probably a really, really dumb choice. People in my family said, "What are you doing?" at the time. But I did what I felt was important. But I paid for the education necessary to be able to help. I'm not saying write your check to me now. I'm saying find people like me and write your check to the organizations which support them, the 501c3s, where you can get the tax deduction, or if you just have it where your business can do it out of marketing dollars, then write a check out of marketing dollars. But
But if you don't know who to write the check to, this is what I'm saying. If you
then
don't
contact
know who to
Lisa
support,
and
then
I.
get in touch with us
Yeah, yeah,
because we will connect you with the people who need your funds to continue their good work or to get a program off the ground. And that's my call to action is reach out to us. You can email us, you can comment on this live stream on Facebook, on YouTube. You can reach out to us through social media. My email address is lisa@parentingaces.com. Dewey, yours, I don't know what yours is because
I
I
don't even.
just pushed something in my phone.
Dewey Evans at gmail.com will get to me. That
There
so
you go. So, two easy ways to contact us, and we will connect you. That I'm speaking for both of us, but we will
Yeah,
connect
that's
you
cool.
and let that be the takeaway from this week's episode.
All right, now that I'm all riled up, I gotta find some place to go. You got me going. Um,
Sorry.
it's it's a
It's
place
my
that I've had
job.
passion. I've had passion here for almost 3 decades. So it's not going to just go away. I may have to find other places
Good.
to apply my craft and make more money, but I'd love to help tennis any way I can. So
Well, reach out to us, folks. We're here for you as a conduit of information and connection. And with that, stay safe, everybody. We're still dealing with COVID-19, even though it's out of the news cycle, it seems, right now, because there are other bigger things happening. But 2020, we just need a reset. I'm ready for January. That said, Dewey, have a good week. Stay safe, stay healthy, keep that heart getting stronger. And as always, it's a pleasure to chat with you.
yeah, we'll be back next week. Be well.
See ya.
Bye.